The courtroom was silent as America's familiar face. Kody Brown of Sister Wives stood before the judge. Cameras flashed. There were whispers in the air, and the world waited with bated breath. Was today the day his entire family would be broken up by the law? The air in the courthouse was charged with tension. Journalists rustled their notes. Cameras were stabilized by photographers, and inquisitive bystanders leaned forward in anticipation. The one name on everyone's lips was the same. Kody Brown, to millions. He wasn't simply another guy going before the law. He was the charismatic, shaggy-headed patriarch of the popular TLC reality show Sister Wives. A man who had made himself familiar to millions by inviting the world into the unusual life he led. But today, those cameras weren't there for entertainment's sake. Today, they were capturing a true-life drama. One that would determine the future of his whole family. As Kody entered the courtroom, murmurs spread throughout the room. There he is, the polygamist from television. He is actually going to jail. What is going to become of all of those children? This was not another Hollywood celebrity news. This was a man who had constructed a family of 4 wives and 18 children. And suddenly he was caught in a storm that doubted not only his decisions, but the entire fabric of his existence. From the outside, the life of Kody Brown appeared to be a curiosity of reality television. Audiences gathered every week to see him juggle 4 homes, dozens of kids, and the stresses of plural marriage. Some people watched and marveled at the candor. Others shook their heads in astonishment. But what many didn't know was that hidden behind the TV smiles and family dinners, the Browns lived with the ever-present fear. The fear of the law. Back in their home state of Utah, polygamy was a crime for a long time. Although Kody was lawfully married to only one woman, his first wife Mary, the state took his spiritual marriages to the other 3 wives as violating the bigamy laws. For years it hung in the shadows of their lives. Would one day a knock at the door shatter their family apart? Would the cameras that had made them famous become evidence against them? That dread finally came true when authorities started investigating Kody and his clan. Now, rather than being in their living room amidst children, Kody sat in a courtroom, looking at the judge who held his destiny in their hands. The atmosphere within the courtroom was reminiscent of a high-stakes film. The prosecution, with their law books, case files, and conviction that Kody Brown had overstepped, stood tall on one side. Standing opposite them were Kody's defense team, ready to fight not only on issues of legality but of freedom, choice, and human rights as well. The judge, serious and unyielding, looked at the man in front of them. They knew this was more than an ordinary case. This was a case that had drawn millions into the fray. A decision here wouldn't only be impacting Kody Brown, it could provide precedent for families nationwide. The courtroom was filled to the brim. Some were there out of morbid curiosity, drawn by the sight of a reality TV star in court. Others came because they felt that the case was one of religious freedom. And others came with their minds made up, thinking that what Kody and his wives had done was outright immoral. Each cough, each shuffle, each groan of the wooden benches seemed magnified. The atmosphere was oppressive, not merely with legalistic argument, but with feeling, dispute, and the burden of history. As Kody entered the courtroom, his very presence commanded attention. His blonde locks fell to his shoulders, his face a mixture of determination and nervousness. He looked toward the benches upon which his wives were seated, their faces a mixture of fear and resilience. Christine gripped her tissue tightly, Janelle had her hands clasped in her lap. Mary maintained a steely gaze upon Kody, and Robin muttered a prayer beneath her breath. To them, this wasn't only their husband's trial, this was a trial of their very way of life. Kody set his shoulders straight, attempting to radiate calm. He had spent years in front of cameras, but this was different. There were no take-twos, no editors, no producers determining the shot. Here, every word he uttered could alter the destiny of his family. In the rear row, a reporter jotted down notes. Reality star faces bigamy charges. Courtroom filled with media frenzy. Another spoke softly into a recorder. Public opinion split. Freedom of choice or flaunting the law? The murmurs of the public had a blend of intrigue and condemnation. Some voiced, He knew what he was doing. The law is the law. Others maintained, he's not hurting anyone. Why should love be a crime? That split reflected the larger argument in the nation at large. Was Kody Brown a criminal, or was he a man fighting for his right to live his faith and values? Finally, the judge's gavel struck the bench. Silencing the murmurs, the trial was about to begin. The prosecution would argue that Kody had openly violated laws against cohabitation with multiple women. They would paint him as a man who flaunted the law on national television, daring the state to intervene. The defense, though, was ready to spin a different yarn. That Kody was not a criminal but a husband and father who just wanted to live his truth. That sentencing him was not justice, but persecution. The stakes were high. If found guilty, Kody would not only risk fines or probation, but the threat of jail time. Worse, his family might be broken apart. Children parted, wives forced to disperse, and a home that had been built together for decades broken up by the law. As the opening arguments were underway, one thing was certain. This was not going to be an easy legal fight. This was about culture, religion, freedom, and what defines family. Kody sat quietly, hearing lawyers argue his life as if it were a problem to be solved. He caught a glimpse of his children in the gallery, their wide eyes conveying confusion and fear. To them, he was not a case file. He was just dad. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same show that made the Browns famous for their openness was now the very reason they were in court. Sister wives had turned their private life into public entertainment, but now that exposure had become a weapon in the prosecution's hands. And so, with each word that passed his lips, the tension mounted. This was not the start of a trial. This was the start of a fight for survival. Not only for Kody, but for all individuals who chose to be different from what the law classed as normal. By the time the first day of court had reached its end, one thing was certain: this was going to be a fight that the world would never forget. The rumors had become headlines. The headlines had become debates, and the debates had become a question that would reverberate long after the courthouse doors were closed. Can love itself ever be illegal? And as Kody Brown exited the courtroom that day, hand in hand with his wives, he knew one thing for sure: the battle was just starting. The gavel fell again, its boom resonating as a crack of thunder through the charged courtroom. That one noise wove the focus from Kody Brown and his clan to the men and women poised to destroy his life with words, facts, and law. That was the point when the accusation became tangible. For weeks prior to this trial, speculation had circulated in tabloids and television talk shows. Would the state finally pursue Kody Brown? Was this all just for publicity, or was the government hell-bent on making him an example? Now facing the judge, the prosecutor was prepared to deliver that answer in a loud and clear yes. The prosecutor, a bright-eyed woman in a dark suit, stood erect and spoke with careful precision. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," she started, "this case is not about reality TV. This case is not about glory or riches. It is about the plain fact that the defendant, Kody Brown, has publicly, willfully, and knowingly violated the law." He paused, looking around the packed room, allowing the tension to mount, and then he added, "The law here in this state is clear. No one shall cohabit with several partners in the guise of marriage. Mr. Brown has done just that, not quietly, not in secret, but proudly and openly before an audience of millions." The words fell like arrows. Each reference to millions of viewers served as a reminder to all that this was no secret act. Kody's whole family unit had been aired into living rooms nationwide. The same show that brought him fame now served as Exhibit A in the case against him. The prosecution lost no time presenting its evidence. Footage from sister wives was lined up, showing on a big screen in the courtroom. There was Kody introducing his 4 wives. There was the dinner gathered around the table, 4 women splitting chores, children running among them. There was Kody detailing his spiritual marriages, not officially acknowledged in the law books, but real enough in their home. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said firmly, "you cannot deny what your eyes see. This man has structured his household to mimic polygamy. The law calls this bigamy, and the law is clear: it is illegal." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the clips played. For the prosecution, it was the perfect weapon, undeniable proof straight from the Browns' own living room. The prosecutor took it further, projecting Kody as a man who not only disrespected the law, but challenged the state to stand up against him. This is not a man who made a quiet error, he contended. This is a man who flaunted his transgression of the law on national television. He invited millions to view, and by doing so he stuck his finger in the eye of the legal system. The portrait was harsh. Kody, once seen by many as a smiling father trying to keep a complicated family together, was now being cast as a defiant outlaw. The prosecutors wanted the judge and the public to see not a loving husband, but a man who thought he was above the law. The prosecution also spoke about the children. 18 children were living in a household where, according to the state, the law was being broken daily. What message does this send to those children? The prosecutor demanded that it is acceptable to disregard the law if it doesn't align with your personal beliefs, that families can be built outside the boundaries of legality without consequence. The question hit at something deep. It was no longer about Kody anymore. It was the message his family projected to a whole generation of youth, his children, his community, and even viewers at home. Kody's attorneys sat quietly while the prosecution raged. They did not interrupt. They did not object strenuously. They allowed the charges to dangle in the air, waiting for their turn to challenge them. But Kody could feel the gravity of each word. Sitting in the defense table, he balled up his fists in the confines of the desk. To the state, he was not a father. He was not a husband. He was not a man of God. He was merely a lawbreaker. For years, Kody had braced himself for criticism. From neighbors, from the public, from strangers who didn't know his family. But hearing himself called a criminal in a court of law stung deeper than he'd ever thought. Outside the courthouse, journalists scrambled to air the charges. Reality star on trial for bigamy. One news anchor yelled. Kody Brown flaunted the law on national TV, say prosecutors. Another declared. Public opinion divided nearly immediately. Supporters online made their cases that the Browns weren't harming anyone. Critics crowded comment boards with outrage. The law is the law. If he wishes to live this way, relocate to another state. He should not get off scot-free just because he's on television. All the accusations in the courtroom appeared to radiate outward into living rooms and social media streams throughout the country. As the prosecution detailed its case, Kody kept his eyes on his family. He saw Christine bow her head, Janelle's lips pressed tight, Mary's hand gripping the bench so hard her knuckles turned white, and Robin whispering prayers. He thought of his children. How would they remember this moment? Would they see their father as a fighter, or as a man in chains? Kody wasn't a fool. He was aware his way of life was inflammatory. But for him, it wasn't rebellion. It was faith, heritage, and love. Now in the harsh glare of the courtroom, all that was being distorted into something horrible, a crime. The biggest tool the prosecution had wasn't even the law itself. It was public shame. By bringing Kody's personal religion and family life into the courtroom light, they made him an example. It wasn't about one man. It was about making a point that anyone who lived like Kody Brown might be in the same boat, and that perhaps was the most chilling aspect. As the prosecutor finally sat down after finishing his opening argument, the courtroom seemed to be more heavy than before. The charges hung like a storm cloud over everyone. Kody's attorneys quietly gathered their papers, ready to mount their defense. The judge signaled for a recess, and the scraping of benches as people rose filled the air. Some shook their heads at Kody in reproval. Others shot him sympathetic glances. Kody stood alongside him, taking a deep breath. He knew this was just the start of things. The allegations had been laid out, the proof presented, and now it was time for him to battle back. As Kody exited the courtroom with hordes of reporters snapping photos, one question appeared to linger in the air. Was he a man of faith unjustly targeted, or a lawbreaker being held accountable at last? The charges had been hurled like bullets. Now the actual fight, the defense, the voice of the family, and the battle for liberty, was set to start. The courtroom was filled with law, evidence, and accusation. But with the dying away of the prosecution's voice, a new sound started to rise up. The shaking, tearful voices of those who knew Kody Brown not as a defendant but as a husband, a father, and the center of their world. If the prosecution had branded Kody as a lawbreaker, his family would now brand him as something else: a protector, a provider, and a man of faith. To begin with was Christine, one of Kody's longtime wives. She fidgeted with her glasses and sat down in the witness box. The courtroom fell silent. Even the cameras breathed their collective breath for her. Her voice shook at first, but grew steadier as she spoke. "We are not criminals," she said, gazing straight at the judge. "We are a family, we share our dinner, we raise our children together. We laugh, we cry, and yes, we suffer together. But that doesn't make us outlaws." She took a breath, collecting herself. "I became Kody's wife out of my faith, but also out of love. I made this choice. I was never coerced. And yet for making the choice of a life that feels good for me, I sit here to see my family treated as if we are harmful." Her words cut deep. Whispers circulated in the gallery. The courtroom was finally hearing the Browns, not as reality television personalities, not as suspects, but as human beings. Then came Janelle, calm and collected, but her eyes gave away years of silent fear. "For years," she told the court, "we lived with the shadow of prosecution hanging over us. Every knock at the door made me wonder, is this the moment they come to take my family away?" She gazed at the prosecutors squarely. "You claim this is a crime. I claim this is a home. You view several marriages. I view children who understand they are loved by many mothers, and not left behind by any. How can that possibly be criminal?" Her testimony reminded everyone of the children beyond the arguments of legality. 18 children who would be personally affected by losing the father who had tucked them into bed, cheered at their soccer games, and walked them through life. As Mary, Kody's original and sole lawful wife, took the stand, the room became more tense. She was with Kody for the longest time, for the biggest highs and the lowest lows. Her voice broke when she talked. "When Kody married me, it was legal. Everything was copacetic in the eyes of the law. But when we decided to live our faith and add other wives to our household, suddenly, we were criminals." She bit back tears. "Do you know what it's like to enter a supermarket and have people point at you? To have whispers? That's the polygamist wife. To understand that at any instant your children could have to watch their father be led away." Her candor drew a portrait not of defiance, but of frailty. This was not about celebrity. This was about dignity, privacy, and survival. Lastly, Robin, the newest wife, testified. She was the one most criticized by critics for busting up the family. But today her mission was obvious. She was there to defend them. "I knew when I became part of this family that others would judge us," she said gently. "But what I didn't anticipate was that the law would treat us like criminals. I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't brainwashed. I fell in love. And I chose this family." She glanced at the jury, her words firm. "We're not asking to be treated any differently. We're asking to be left in peace, to bring up our children, to practice our religion, to love whom we love." Her appeal wasn't passionate, it was genuine, and sometimes the softest voice has the most power. Although the children did not directly testify, their presence in court spoke louder than words. Sitting in the benches at the back of the courtroom behind their mothers were the children, wide-eyed, their small hands holding each other's. Some nervously doodled in notebooks. Others looked at their father with tears welling up in their eyes. Their innocence was indubitable. The prosecution had maintained the kids were growing up in a culture of crime, but to everyone who examined them closely, what they saw instead were children who loved their father and mothers. Children who dreaded losing the only family they had. By the time the wives were done with their testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom had been transformed. The law remained the law, but now the faces of the people impacted by the law were impossible to ignore. The reporters wrote madly. One whispered, "It's not a case anymore. It's a human story." Another shook his head and said, "Hard to refer to them as criminals after hearing this." Even the judge leaned back in her chair, her face gentler than earlier, as if considering not only the words of the law, but the hearts of the individuals before them. Seated at the defense table, Kody remained still, his hands clasped, but his heart racing in his chest. Every testimony was like a mirror reflecting the love, devotion, and suffering of his family. When Christine spoke, he saw the bravery that had held their family firm in storms. When Janelle spoke, he recalled nights they hushed about the terror of losing everything. When Mary spoke, he felt the pain of her sacrifices, the cost she paid to journey with him along this path. When Robin spoke, he saw the hope that she had brought into their lives, even when the world was against them. By the end, Kody's eyes glistened. He wasn't a man easily brought to tears, but hearing his wives defend not just him but their way of life reminded him why he was fighting. The prosecution had used law and evidence, but the defense had something more powerful. Humanity. Christine provided the family with a voice of love. Yanel provided the family with a voice of fear. Mary provided the family with a voice of sacrifice. Robin provided the family with a voice of hope. Combined, their statements created a powerful story that it was not about crime. It was about family. At the end of the day, the courtroom was unusually subdued. Journalists stowed away their notebooks without gossip. Onlookers filed out slowly. Most deep in thought, even the prosecutors looked away. Maybe understanding that facts and law alone could not wash away the raw emotion that had just filled the room. The wives of Kody Brown hadn't testified. They had changed the case. On the courthouse steps, cameras mobbed the Browns. Newsmen yelled questions. Was the judge swayed? What if you lose? Christine responded quietly. We're not here to win or lose. We're here to speak the truth about who we are. As the family drove away, the world was left to wonder with a question more compelling than any courtroom case. If love, faith, and choice constitute a family, can a court of law actually determine if that family should exist? The courtroom had heard the stern voice of the prosecution and the sobbing testimonies of Kody's wives. Now, however, all eyes were on the man at the center of it all. For hours he had sat quietly, listening as strangers argued his life. Finally, it was his time to speak. The room was quiet as Kody Brown stood up. He smoothed his suit front, raised his chin, and approached the witness stand. The reporters leaned forward, pens poised. His wives breathed quietly. His kids looked on in awe, knowing that their father's words could alter everything. When Kody started speaking, his voice was even but had the intensity of decades of fear, fighting, and love. I want to make something clear, he said. I am not here because I believe I am better than the law. I am here because I believe in freedom. Freedom to love, freedom to worship, and freedom to raise a family without the threat of being treated like a criminal. He hesitated, looking at the prosecutors. Yes, I share my life with more than one woman. Yes, I refer to them as my wives. But I have but one legal marriage. The others are spiritual, founded upon faith and commitment. I am not violating marriage statutes. I am living within my beliefs. His words struck the room with impact. They were not defensive or bitter. They were firm, sincere, and measured. Kody pushed forward, his eyes on the judge. For me, this is not about rebellion, he went on. This is about religion. My family feels that plural marriage is a way to achieve spiritual fulfillment. It is not lust. It is not power. It is responsibility and commitment. Each woman in my household consented to this life, and each child in my household is loved, nurtured, and provided for. We are not evil people. We are a family. There was a silence in the courtroom. Even those who opposed polygamy couldn't help but be moved by the earnestness in his voice. The lawyers for Kody made the most of the moment, passionately and in detail. They contended that the case wasn't about defending society. It was about punishing personal religious choice. This is not about fraud. This is not about abuse. This is not about someone sneaking around. One attorney declared. This is about a man who has chosen to live his faith openly and honestly. The state is trying to use the law to police private relationships. That is not justice. That is persecution. They referred to constitutional protections. The freedom of religion, the right to privacy, protection of family life. Punishing Mr. Brown, the attorney went on, is punishing belief itself. And that is something the Constitution does not permit. The prosecution, not ready to concede, shot back. Sincerely, this is not about religion. This is about the law. The defendant opted to put his lifestyle on television for millions of people to see, and in that, he essentially admitted to breaking the laws of this state. If we go down this road, we provide a loophole where anybody can invoke faith as a shield for criminality. What does that say? The courtroom was a war of words. Law against liberty. Evidence against emotion. Order against choice. One side demanded that rules had to be obeyed. The other maintained that love and faith should never be illegalized. And then there was the moment that changed the whole case. Cody leaned into the microphone and spoke softly but decisively. If being a criminal for loving my family is what it comes down to, so be it, he declared. But I will not apologize for being a father to my children and a husband to my wives. I will not apologize for my faith. And I will not apologize for the life we built together. Gasps were heard in the room. Some perceived arrogance. Others perceived bravery. But everyone could not help but acknowledge the strength of his conviction. Journalists scurried to take down every sentence. Headlines were already taking shape before the gavel ever fell. Kody Brown defiant in court. Polygamous patriarch stands up for his religion. Freedom versus law. The Browns battle. The judge remained silent. Hands clasped, eyes narrowed. This was not a simple case. On paper the law was straightforward. But in life it was complicated. Convicting Kody would be ripping apart a family that, despite the controversy surrounding it, was obviously held together by love. The judge was aware that the choice made in this courtroom would have precedent status and possibly reverberate far wider than Kody Brown and his wives. Would they enforce the strict letter of the law, or acknowledge the larger principle of freedom? As the trial approached this turning point, a crowd of protesters grew each day outside the courthouse. Protesters came with signs. Family is freedom. One law, one marriage. Stop criminalizing love. The country was polarized. Talk shows dwelled on the case nightly. Some of the hosts ridiculed Kody, declaring him reckless. Others defended him for having the courage of his convictions. Social media went into frenzy with arguments, hashtags, and impassioned debates. But within the courtroom, none of this was audible to the Browns. To them, only the voices that entered these four walls meant anything. Kody's testimony concluded with a striking declaration. I am not asking you to believe what I believe. I am not asking you to live as I live. I am asking only for the right to make that decision without fear of imprisonment, without fear of losing my family. If this is a free country, then let us be free. His wives dabbed tears. His children looked on with pride. Even some in the gallery were nodding silently. The prosecution appeared exasperated, their gleaming arguments dulled by sheer humanity. As the day drew to a close, it was apparent the trial was no longer the same. What had started as a matter of law-breaking had evolved into a fight regarding liberty, family, and faith. The defense had turned the tables. Kody was no longer a defendant. He was a symbol. A man fighting against an establishment many were now questioning. The judge ordered adjournment, their face impassive, but everyone could sense it. The tide was shifting. As Kody emerged from the courthouse under a barrage of cameras and flashes, he was certain of one thing. They had hit a nerve. The case was no longer exclusively about him. It was about something greater. But would the judge agree? The Browns had talked, the defense had thundered, and Kody had held firm. Now the fate of his family hung in the hands of the court's ultimate ruling. The country waited. Would justice prevail, or would liberty? The day of the verdict struck like a tempest on the horizon. Weeks had passed while the courtroom was a forum of ideas. Law versus liberty. Tradition versus faith. Order versus family. Yet now it all depended on this moment. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was twice as big. Cameras lined the block, microphones shoved into the faces of anyone involved in the case, and protest signs waved through the autumn breeze. Some read justice for families, and others called for one man, one wife. The Browns, whether they liked it or not, had become symbols of a national controversy. Inside, the mood was somber. The wives clung to each other, holding hands tightly. Kody stood rigid in his suit, eyes fixed on the judge. For a man accustomed to being the star of reality TV, this was no longer a show. This was survival. The judge cleared their throat, and the room fell silent. This case, the judge started off, has made us question the definition of law, freedom, and family in a manner that few courts ever do. Each ear strained closer. Each pen for every reporter hung in suspense. Under the law of the state, marriage is defined in singular terms. but the Browns have lived publicly in a manner that subverts this construct. The prosecution maintains that such behavior cannot be ignored, because the law must be obeyed. The defense maintains that this case is not one of marriage fraud or abuse, but of private religious practice, enshrined under our Constitution. The judge hesitated, gazing straight at Kody. Justice isn't ever simple, but this is not an easy decision. Finally, the words were spoken. This court is not finding enough evidence to indict Mr. Brown for bigamy under the law. The family has had only one lawful marriage, the others being spiritual marriages not sanctioned by the state. Though this way of life tests our legal system's norms, it is not in this case a crime under the law of the land. Gasps were heard in the courtroom. Some cheered, others groaned. The wives hugged, crying openly. Kody exhaled a deep breath. He hadn't realized he was holding. But the judge wasn't done. But said the judge, this ruling does not imply that the court approves or supports plural marriage. The Browns have put themselves at risk for legal and social repercussions by living openly like this. Although this court is unable to punish them criminally, they need to know that their course will continue to be controversial, and challenges will still exist. It was a win, but a nuanced one. The Browns were free, but their freedom was wrapped in warning. Inside of minutes, the news spread across the country. Kody Brown not guilty. Television channels broadcast special reports, social media went wild, and hashtags blazed to the top of trending lists. Some hugged the ruling as a victory for liberty. At last, one observer declared on a late-night program, "Love is not on trial anymore." Others were angry. Oppositionists branded the decision a slap in the face to marriage legislation. Politicians co-opted the case to advance their own agendas, some demanding more stringent definitions of marriage, others calling for increased freedom of choice. For weeks, Kody Brown's face was ubiquitous. His name wasn't just associated with sister wives anymore. It was associated with one of the most widely covered courtroom struggles of the decade. In their own home, the Browns marked the occasion with restraint. The wives prepared a big dinner. The kids filled the rooms with laughter, and Kody sat at the head of the table surveying the scene with a sense of relief and thanks. "This is why we fought," he said quietly, his voice echoing across the room. "For this family. For us." Christine wiped her tears, saying, "We stood together. And that's why we're still standing now." For the Browns, the verdict was more than legal relief. It was validation, a public acknowledgement that even if the world didn't agree with them, their family wasn't illegal. But when the party was over, reality set in. The court had acquitted them, but the shame lingered. Strangers gossiped in supermarkets, tabloids pushed further into their personal lives, and online trolls became more vocal than ever. The family quickly learned, winning in the courts didn't equal winning in life. Mary, the initial wife, conceded in an interview, "We might not go to prison anymore, but we still go judgment every single day." And Janelle added, "Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in the courtroom. They're fought in the eyes of the people around us." In the years that followed, the case left an undeniable mark. Scholars debated it in law schools. Documentaries analyzed it. Politicians cited it. It was both a sword and shield for the Browns. They had made their mark in history, whether they liked it or not. The courtroom battle was a part of their legend, forged along with their TV stardom. Fans celebrated them as champions of family freedom. Critics condemned them as reckless extremists who eroded moral values. But one thing was certain, no one overlooked them anymore. Years later, Kody reflected on the trial in an interview. His hair was grayer, his children grown, but his conviction remained strong. "That courtroom," he said, "was the hardest place I've ever stood. But it was also the most important, because it wasn't just about me. It was about saying to the world, love is not a crime. Family is not a crime. Faith is not a crime." He slumped back, his gaze far away. "We did not win everything, but we won enough, and that will always count." The courtroom tale of Kody Brown evolved beyond a mere individual battle. It became a symbol of freedom, of controversy, of the perpetual battle between individual freedom and societal norms. For a few, the Browns were a reminder that not all families look alike. For others, they were a cautionary tale about what occurs when tradition is pushed. But for YouTube viewers, Sister Wives fans, and nosy observers everywhere. It was good drama, the type of real-life soap opera that blurred the distinction between reality TV and reality. With the dust finally settled, one thing was certain: the Browns departed that courtroom, not only as reality celebrities, but as survivors of a legal battle that could have devastated them. Their case scarred them, but it left a legacy, one to be argued, remembered, and retold for years to come. And in the end, no matter whether they loved them or hated them, everyone had to acknowledge when Kody Brown walked into that courtroom. He didn't just battle for his family, he battled for the right to live life on his own terms. Because in the law and love saga, sometimes the strongest verdict isn't the one handed down by a judge, but the one etched out in history.